you have not had a religious argument until you had it with a guy who knows Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and he knows the Bible inside and out, and he knows where all the bones are buried. He can tell you about all the scrolls and all the translations and all church history. I was feeling very, very outmatched. And here's what really scared me. Oh, crap. What if Nietzsche is right? That scared the crap out of me. As much as that scares me, I am going to follow the science wherever it leads. And I felt as though I had leapt off of a cliff into pitch black, having no idea where I'm going to land.
There's controversy around Roe versus Wade, but what about birth versus hatched and the evolution of mankind? In 2019, Perry Marshall announced the world's most significant science research challenge at London's Royal Society, the $10 million Evolution 2.0 prize. The challenge centered around unraveling the process by which DNA encodes and communicates information essential in understanding the mechanisms of evolution and the origin of life. Now, you may remember, maybe a little bit, back in early 2020, the world was shut down by a virus. Now, there are more conspiracies about that virus than who shot JFK. But no matter where it came from, is it possible that we're missing something no conspiracy, or for that matter, even traditional medical professional, even the World Health Organization, has truly considered? Well, according to our guest, there is. And what he's about to reveal to us about viruses will undoubtedly blow your mind. It's fascinating. And I want to welcome you aboard this episode of The Dov Behrens Show. In 2024, we have been broadcasting, will you believe it, 16 years. And in that time, we've aspired to bring you the very best shows with outstanding thought leaders and deep thinkers as guests. And that's why we've constantly evolved the show. And now, as you may know, we used to be known as the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast, or even Curiosity Bites. We brought the two shows together to give you the very best of both worlds. And that gets you a chance to step into the heartbeat of the world with the Dov Behrens Show, where you come for the stories and you will stay for the learning. We're excited to have you as part of the community. Every episode offers tantalizing taste of the delicious thoughts and wisdom of global leaders, deep thinkers, entertainers, and a spectrum of fully captivating minds, from astronauts soaring the cosmos to philosophers plumbing the soul's depths. You ready for the Odyssey? This is more than a podcast. It's your passport to unparalleled insights. We bring you fascinating guests each week to tune into your and advance your personal and leadership evolution. This week, our guest is, as I said, Perry Marshall. Before we go any further, though, I want you to know we do need your help in staying relevant. So please, would you do us a favor? Rate, review, subscribe to the show, and if possible, share the show with everybody you know. It really makes a huge difference to us, particularly seeing as we're kicking off this new show, The Dov Behrens Show. In this fascinating episode, like I said, our guest is Perry Marshall. In 2019, he announced the world's most significant science research challenge at the London Royal Society, the $10 million Evolution 2.0 prize. On top of that, you might be familiar with the Pareto principle. That's the 80-20 rule. It's rarely understood in depth. However, one of the few people to truly grasp its depth is Perry Marshall. He reinvented Pareto's principle. It was published in the Harvard Business Review. Most recently, he has co-authored the very first paper to accurately explain how viruses evolve. That's where we're going. This scientific paper offers a new way of looking at things through cognitive-based evolution, where the cells of our body work together in a smart way to keep us healthy. It's a new field of virology called natural viral engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome one of my favorite intellectual and spiritual training partners, Mr. Perry Marshall!
Dov, it's great to be here.
Oh, good to have a combo. You and I have been having some really great combos of late off air, which have just been very cool. And I was so glad that we got to meet up recently in Vancouver when you came in for a special event. And I was honored to be invited to that, so thank you. So here's where I like to start the show. We'll get into the depths and meat in a minute, but I'm really interested in you. We've had lots of private conversations, but I would like for people to understand what's the origin story of what gives Perry's life meaning.
Well, I'm a pastor's kid. And I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, in a very conservative faith community. And I went to engineering school at the University of Nebraska, and I was obsessed with audio systems and engineering. And so I ended up going into business and getting very interested in digital marketing. And about 20 years ago, I went to China to see my brother, who was a missionary. And he said, I'm done with this missionary stuff. I don't believe it anymore. I'm not a Christian anymore. And I'm quitting my job and going home. And I knew that he had a lot of questions, but I didn't know that was going to happen. And we were on a bus ride, and we're in the back of a bus arguing with each other. And I go, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. I said, this is a nice piece of engineering, and I'm an engineer. I should know. And I said, you don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you? And he says, hold on. And he comes right back with me with a really, everybody's heard this. Oh, Perry, you don't need any kind of design. You don't need any kind of plan. You just need millions of years and natural selection, and you're going to get a hand. It's just all part of the natural evolutionary process. I thought two things. I thought, first of all, in all of my years of engineering, I can't think of a single thing I've ever learned that would back up what he just said.
Right.
I hadn't really studied evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so that brought me to the second thought. And the second thought was, well, just because I'm not familiar with what would make that true doesn't mean it's not true. It could be true.
Yes.
And I don't think he and I are going to solve this today on this bus. And we're already making ourselves miserable. Like this is supposed to be a vacation, and like we're like the claws are coming out.
Right.
But you know what? I'm just going to stop arguing with Brian right now. And when I get home, I'm going to hit the books because I actually want to know. I just suddenly realized having this conversation with Brian, I think I need to know about this.
You were brought up Christian, you were an engineer, but you'd not thought about evolution in that way?
Well, not in any great detail, partly because I wasn't really against evolution. It's like, oh, okay. If evolution's how God made the world, that's fine. But that's actually not what Brian said. What Brian said is, to quote him, he goes, look, Perry, you got falcons flying around for millions of, hundreds of thousands of years. You got hundreds of millions of falcons. And once in a while, there's an accidental copying error in their DNA, and it happens to make it better instead of worse. Then the better ones will outhunt the inferior ones, and they'll just keep getting better. This is what he actually said. Right. And he said, you don't need any design process for that to work. And that's where he caught me, because I thought, I don't believe that would work. That does not sound right. I've never seen that work in software programs. I've never seen that work in manufacturing. Why would it work in birds? But I didn't have to sit there very long to realize, well, there's a bunch of biologists who would say, oh yeah, it does. And I thought, well, either I know something they don't know, or they know something I don't know, and I think I better find out. And Brian had really dragged me to the edge. The truth is, this conversation had been going on for about a year. Mm-hmm. It just leaked way further than I thought it was going to. My brother is checking out of, we have deeply religious family, and we do church, and the holidays and all that stuff. And Brian's just opting out of all of it. This is a shock to my system. And I'm finding myself asking an engineering question to try, is the hand at the end of my arm a purposeful thing, or is the world just billiard balls banging around in the universe? And I had never framed that as an engineering question like that. And so I decided I'm going to stop arguing with my brother, and I'm going to take this really seriously. Maybe these biologists are right. I want to know. And if this makes me an atheist, then I guess it's going to make me an atheist. But I'm going to swallow my pride, and I am going to let go of my preconceptions. I'm going to honestly entertain the possibility, what if the other side is right? And here we go. Down the rabbit hole we go.
What year was that?
That was 2004.
2004. And then 15 years later, you start the prize.
Yes, 15 years later, I go to the Royal Society in Great Britain, which is the oldest scientific society in the world. Isaac Newton used to be the president. And I give a presentation and I announce a $10 million prize for the origin of the genetic code. And I can go directly back to Brian. In fact, my presentation at the Royal Society, you can watch it on a video on the internet. And I have a picture of that bus that we were in when we were arguing.
It's fantastic.
It's crazy. Who would ever believe it?
But, it's such an interesting piece because there's kind of like, and I've used these words before, and I know it upsets some people, but there's religion as we know it, which is, quote, faith-based. And then there is science, which is, you break this down, you break that down, but it tends to be reductionistic.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I had this conversation that being in the science class when I was a kid and getting thrown out for disrupting the class because when they said, well, it came from, all the gases came together and created the Big Bang. And I went, well, where did the gas come from? Get out of my class. You disrupted. Right? And it wasn't, I wasn't trying to disrupt. I wasn't being an ass. I actually wanted to understand because as much as you and I have different beliefs about faith, I still get to the place of science requires one miracle at the beginning.
Oh, yeah, at least.
Yeah, but even if you go back, it's like, you've got to have a miracle first.
Yes.
Right? And yes. I don't even like the word miracle because it's too nebulous, but there's something you can't explain. That's the bottom line.
So how about instead of the word miracle, you say something nebulous?
Exactly right.
There is something, what's a nebula? It's a big cloud of stars that you can't really see through.
Right. Well, what's that? There's this great Christian comedian who says, in the beginning, there was God and God created everything. And then when you die, you return to God. And then he says, however, science would believe that in the beginning, there was nothing. And when you die, you return to nothing. Isn't that the same thing? I was like, that's a really good thought. I like that. So I want to talk about this latest work you've done, because you and I have had other discussions before about Evolution 2.0. And by the way, if you haven't heard those, you can find those online. Just look up Dov Baron, look up Perry Marshall. There's amazing conversations around Evolution 2.0. And by the way, on Pareto's law. So we can also find that too. But in this context, this new field of virology, natural viral engineering, I know that you've taken a deviation even to some degree from where you were as it's exploding out now, involving yourself in cancer research and all kinds of wonderful things with amazing human beings. Give us a sort of grasp of what this new field of virology actually is.
So let's start with just a thumbnail sketch of what I ended up finding out when I went the rabbit hole with Brian. And I have a book called Evolution 2.0 that tells the whole story. What Brian said to me on the bus was, falcons flying around and there's a million of them and there's a random copying error every now and then and it's just going to make it better. That is incorrect. That is not how organisms evolve. It's not how anything evolves. The reason that evolution happens is because every cell in the world and every organism, every multicelled organism has the ability to alter its genetics. Every cell can cut, splice, rearrange its DNA, change its destiny, change what is passed to its offspring. And this is going on 24/7, 365. And it does not happen by accident. It happens in response to hundreds and thousands of signals from the environment, whether it's temperature, humidity, predators, climate, you name it. All of that goes into the mix. It is astonishingly, blindingly sophisticated. To suggest that it happens by accident, I realize people have been saying it happens by accident for a century, but it's an insult to the real science and the real biology that is going on. because that is not how it works. And we know this because we are in an age of genetic engineering and CRISPR. There's CRISPR gene editing. You realize that was taken from bacteria, which have the ability, they have a system. When a virus comes in, they process the virus, they read it, they go, what is this? Is this in my database? And if it's seen that before and it goes, oh, that's a bad virus, it will chop it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that mechanism has the ability to edit virus DNA, which is a whole story. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of the level of sophistication of falcons getting better eyes, or birds getting wings, or mammals having legs, or any of that. It's astonishingly sophisticated. And so the story that most people tell you is wrong. And there's 100 years of literature supporting what I just told you. And the Evolution 2.0 book has 600 scholarly references from peer-reviewed journals that back everything up that I said. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, read my book, Evolution 2.0.
No, I highly recommend you do that.
So now let's tell the story of what happened when I went down the virus rabbit hole. So we did the Royal Society announcement in 2019, and a few months later, COVID hit, and my publicist that was helping me publicize the $10 million prize says to me, we're 2 weeks into COVID. And she says, Perry, the media is not interested in anything except virus right now. Like, forget it. You're not getting nothing. Right. So what do you have about viruses? And I go, nothing. And she goes, well, can you come up with something? Because otherwise we're dead in the water. I said, okay, I will. Give me some time. And I said, I'm going to spend one day researching viruses, and I'm going to see if I can come up with anything. So I spent an entire Saturday emailing people and looking into stuff and asking questions and watching YouTube videos. Is there an Evolution 2.0 take on viruses? And I realized, wait a minute, the explanation they're giving us about virus evolution is just like Brian's explanation that I got on that bus. And it's wrong too. Now, we've all lived through a pandemic. We've all learned words that nobody would have ever wanted to ever learn, like cytokine storm and et cetera, right? We've all become experts on pandemics.
Well, I don't know about expert, but we'll go with that, sure.
Well, we've all through one.
We've lived through one, I'll give you that.
But if it wasn't theory for any of us, we all had to put up with it. I said, wait a minute. They're saying that these viruses evolve through copying errors. That can't be right. Mm-hmm. And here's what I found that just totally intrigued me. I started looking at sequences of SARS and MERS and COVID-19, which were all over the place. You could look them up. And I get
related.
And so like SARS is very closely related to COVID and the other coronaviruses. And I looked at the differences, these little diagrams, and they have colored bands. This is this protein and this is this protein. And I look at the colored bands and I go, that's not accidental copying errors. That's exactly like the systems that I described in Evolution 2.0, where corn plants can cut and splice and rearrange their genomes, and cancer cells and all of those things. They do modular rearrangements like Legos, and they move their genes around and they change their gene expression. This is exactly what's happening in these viruses, except wait a minute. Viruses don't have DNA editing machines. They don't have RNA editing machines. But the cells in your body do.
Yes.
And bacteria do. So it must be the cells in your body that are making these modifications. And so this really only took me about a week, but I was like, wait a minute. Everything I can see says that it is the host of the virus that is editing the virus. And so I
pause for a minute. I want everybody to get that.
Yeah.
So we have been given this theory that the viruses are adapting.
Mm-hmm. Which they are.
Yeah, but that it's the virus itself that's adapting. But what you're saying is that the virus is adapting because we're adapting it as the host. Am I correct that correctly?
Yeah, and they're telling you that the virus is adapting by accident.
Yes.
And it's not.
Right.
It's adapting on purpose. And this is so fascinating. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I call Bill Miller, who we're going to start talking about Bill as we go along here. And because he's one of the smartest guys I know, and he's very deep in the evolutionary science, and he's a very good researcher, very interdisciplinary. And I show him these sequences. I go, Bill, when I look at SARS versus COVID versus coronavirus, this is modular. It must be the host moving this around. Do you think this is right? And he goes, give me a week. And he comes back a week later and he says, there's tiny little needles in haystacks scattered all over the place that confirm what you're saying, but nobody has ever pulled them together. I think we are looking at a new field called natural viral engineering. I think we should write a paper. And so I hired 3 geneticists and a virologist, and we started studying DNA sequences because you could, again, the pandemic is raging all around us, and data is, they're getting uploaded to the government websites at a crazy rate. And so I have a geneticist who is downloading these sequences and comparing them, and she's using genome analysis tools to go, so Perry's saying this is modular. What's the evidence that these are just modular arrangements moving all around? And she very much found that. In fact, we spent about 6 or 8 or 9 months continuing to do this analysis and filling the hard drives with data. And the problem was we couldn't seem to get anybody who is a virologist to cooperate. There were several problems. We found a few that were willing, but most of them were so immersed in the old school way of thinking that they wouldn't really consider what we were saying. There was one brilliant guy who loved what we were doing, but the problem was he was losing his eyesight, and he is an older guy, and he didn't have the ability to help us do the analysis that we needed. We didn't have enough budget to hire somebody. Virologists, as you imagine, were incredibly busy during the pandemic because everybody wanted them and wanted their time, and we pretty much needed a volunteer. And so after about a year, I just gave up on it. We had accumulated this huge amount of data and spent quite a bit of money on it, and I just couldn't push it any further. And so I set it aside. Well, a year later, I get this email from Bill. And Bill goes, hey, Perry, and hey, Arthur Reber and František Beluska. He says, hey, you remember that virus project that Perry and I started? I have now written an 80-page Word document. Wow. I have subtracted COVID-19 out of it because it's too controversial still. And I don't want to end up with my head on a stick somewhere. I have taken a bunch of other viruses that nobody's worried about, and I have proven that hosts modify viruses. And in fact, viruses have some way of stimulating the host to modify them. And I've got this paper, let's publish it. And so I helped him, František and Arthur helped him. František is a rock star plant biologist in Bonn, Germany. Arthur Reber is a very interesting guy who has a PhD in psychology and has written about all kinds of interesting things. We finished the paper and we submitted it. First journal rejected it. Second journal, it took 10 months for peer review to happen, and suddenly it came out last May. and it's called Natural Viral Engineering in Cognition-Based Evolution. Now, for a layperson, it's not a very easy paper to read, but if you go to evo2.org, evo2.org, and search virus, you'll find several blog posts about it. You can read them. They are written in plain English.
Yeah, they are readable. Just in case you're going, oh, I don't know if I could get this. You can get this. Honestly, I promise you, it's written very well, very easy to understand. I recommend that you do that. Even if you're just thinking, how is this possible? Just go read that. The thing that Perry just mentioned was Legos. Thinking about it in the context of Legos, you suddenly go, oh, it's such a simple metaphor that it allows you to really grasp it. And it'll make you sound really smart when you're talking to your friends.
So let me step you through what this paper says and what we discovered. Let's reintroduce COVID to the conversation since everybody here is familiar with it.
Yeah.
We all lived through there was Omicron and there was Delta and there was all these different variants that would come and go all over the world. So where did those come from and what actually happened? Well, here's what's really going on. When a virus enters a host, the host goes, I didn't invite you here. You are not welcome here. Get out of here. We don't like you. And the immune system kicks in. And the virus says, I'm here anyway, and you can't get rid of me. And the virus starts going into cells and hijacking cells, and the cells spit out new viruses, and pretty soon you got viruses all over the place. And so all of us remember, as we went through the pandemic, what happened was the virus went from being moderately transmissible and highly, highly lethal to highly transmissible, not lethal.
Yes.
So just 2 days ago, one of my kids' friends, hey, Josh has COVID. And everybody's like, okay, whatever. Right? It's a nothing burger now for the most part, for most people. Okay, he's going to be sick for a few days. He's going to be pretty contagious for a few days, but this is not a big deal. But this is not like 3.5 years ago when there's like body bags in hospitals and, Italy. Remember Italy when the world hadn't shut down yet, and like Italy was shut down because it was everywhere and people were dropping. So what is happening? So what happens is the immune system of your body and the cells of your body say, if I can modify this virus to make it less lethal and more virulent, the more virulent version will outcompete the lethal version and not kill me.
So I want you to say that again, because I want people to really grasp that. That was what the piece, when I got that from you, it was like, oh, that suddenly makes so much more sense, because everybody was freaking out. We need another jab and it's another version of it. And then what you just explained there really went, oh, now this lands. Now I get it. It's not about another jab. It's about understanding how it's working in your system. So please just say that again, because it needs to be landing.
So your body has a virus, and we'll call it version A. And version A is nasty, and it has a certain amount of virality. It has a certain tendency to spread. And your body...
May I interrupt and just say, think of it this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Perry, but think of it this way. How viral is it? How much can other people get it? It's a 5 out of 100. It's not a big deal. But of the 5 out of the 100 to get it, 4 of them are going to drop dead. 4 people are going to drop dead. Now it's going to flip the other way around.
Yeah.
Right?
We went 95 out of 100 and none of them dropped dead.
Right.
And here's the strategy. If that happens, virus B will out-evolve, out-compete virus A, and virus A will disappear and it will be replaced with virus B. And now we'll have a not very dangerous virus instead of a really lethal one. And this is what happens with all viruses. They go from being highly lethal and sort of transmissible to highly transmissible and not lethal. So COVID goes from this horrible, awful thing that's people are dropping dead in New York City and in Italy and in Wuhan to 3.5, 4 years later, it's a serious cold.
Right.
And what's making those changes happen is the cells of your body are modifying the virus, trying to make different versions of it so that the virus will outcompete the virus.
So the virus will outcompete the virus.
So
Evolution of that virus is made by your body to outcompete the original virus, making it weaker and weaker and weaker.
Yes. Yes. And what Bill found out as he researched viruses is that viruses and hosts are always in a symbiotic relationship. So there are diseases where if a mouse has a certain virus, it will be completely immune to a bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
If a mouse does not have a virus, the bacteria will kill the mouse. And the virus is a defense against the bacteria. These kind of relationships are going on all the time. And so we have a very kindergarten crayon idea about viruses, but in fact, viruses are extremely common. There are 10 viruses for every cell on Earth.
That's pretty amazing. 10 viruses for every cell.
One drop of seawater has 1 million viruses in it.
Is that all? Like, I'm never getting in the ocean again.
And most of the time, your body knows how to deal with it. Bacteria know how to deal with it,
yeah.
but they're always trying to get in. And so what we found out was viruses are the open source repository for evolution's code. Okay, so if people know anything about open source software, which is a huge industry, you want a WordPress thing or you want a Linux thing, you want a web server thing, you just go to a free library online and you download it, and then you mash it together in a good computer program and just stick stuff together. This is how most code is written today.
Right.
The same way a programmer gets that off of GitHub, cells get new code for generating new evolutionary sequences from viruses.
Viruses are transporting what the body needs, and the body is taking what it needs to build the system.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. So, for example, the placenta in all mammals, right? So
you pause on that. That's too exciting. Don't go there, because that's really cool. I want to come back to that in part 2.
Oh, okay.
That was like, wow. So we're going to come back to part 2 of the show. We're going to talk about viruses and placenta, and that is going to, honestly, your brain's going to explode. We're going to be back with part 2 of this delicious conversation with Perry Marshall in just one click. Stay curious, my friends. Stay very curious.